You've seen the Stars and Stripes. But that wasn't the first American flag. The original banner of the Revolution still had the British Union Jack in the corner. But why? And why was it scrapped just 2 years later? The Grand Union Flag, also known as the Continental Colors, was first raised in late 1775. It combined 13 red and white stripes with the British Union Jack in the canton. It flew over American ships, military encampments, and even the headquarters of the Continental Army under George Washington. At the time, full independence hadn't yet been declared, and many colonists still considered themselves British subjects fighting for representation, not separation. The design reflected that uncertainty. The 13 stripes represented the unity of the 13 colonies, but the Union Jack signaled loyalty, or at least a strong connection with the crown. For a brief period, it worked as a unifying symbol at a time when the colonies had no official flag. It was familiar to both colonists and British observers, while still distinct from the existing imperial flags. However, after the Declaration of Independence in 1776, public and political opinion shifted. Keeping the British symbol on the flag was no longer seen as appropriate. The Continental Congress responded by passing the Flag Resolution of June 14, 1777, which replaced the Union Jack with a field of white stars on blue, officially creating a new national flag distinct from British imagery. France's Hopkinson's flag design was one of the first serious attempts to give the U.S. a national symbol after independence. In 1777, not long after the Continental Congress passed the Flag Resolution, Hopkinson submitted a version with 13 six-pointed stars arranged in a staggered 3-2-3-2-3 layout. The design aligned with the Flag Resolution passed by the Continental Congress that same year, which called for a flag with 13 stars and 13 stripes to represent the original colonies. Hopkinson was a member of the Continental Congress and had contributed to other national symbols, like designs for the Great Seal, U.S. Navy flags, and the Board of Treasury seal. Confident in his contributions, he sent a bill to Congress asking for payment, not just for the flag but for his other symbolic work too. Congress declined. They said that he was not the only person involved and that no official commission had been documented. Despite this, flags with 13 stars, possibly inspired by his design, were produced and flown. 13-star designs were popular and recognized during the Revolutionary War, especially among naval and military units. But there was no single standard at the time. Dozens of different star patterns appeared in early American flags, and no one version was locked in. Hopkinson's design slowly faded from use. Later flags settled on different star arrangements, and his contribution never got formal status. Still, if you're looking for one of the first real contenders for the flag, this was it. Just not the one that stuck. You've probably heard of the Betsy flag, 13 stars in a neat circle. But here's the part no one talks about. There's no official record that Congress approved, and no proof that Betsy Ross ever pitched it to begin with. So why did this unofficial version become the most famous early American flag? The circular star design most people associate with Ross is familiar for a reason. It's clean, balanced, and looks like something an emerging nation would rally behind. It shows 13 stars, one for each colony, arranged as equals, with 13 red and white stripes. The association with Betsy Ross stems from an 1870 speech given by her grandson, William Canby, who claimed she had sewn the first flag after receiving a sketch from a secret committee led by George Washington. However, no contemporary documentation confirms this. There are no congressional records mentioning her involvement, and Washington was not part of the committee responsible for flag legislation. Even so, the circular pattern aligns with the 1777 Flag Resolution's vague directive, 13 stars in a new constellation, which left room for multiple interpretations. The Ross-style flag likely circulated during and after the war, especially in commemorative and patriotic settings, but it was never adopted as the official design. While not formally rejected by Congress, the Betsy Ross flag was bypassed in favor of other layouts that gained more traction in military and naval use, but it still shaped how Americans imagined their flag's origin. You're in the right place if you're tracking the flags that genuinely competed to represent a nation. Here's one that fought on the battlefield, but never became law. The Brandywine Flag was carried into the Battle of Brandywine in September 1777 by the 7th Pennsylvania Regiment. It featured a red field with an inset canton that looked like a miniature flag itself, with 7 white horizontal stripes beneath a square of 13 white stars, arranged in a 4-5-4 pattern, possibly on a blue or white background, as sources vary. The star layout adhered to the flag resolution, which required 13 stars and 13 stripes, but didn't specify how those stars should be arranged, or even their color or background. So, this flag technically fit the legal description at the time. Like many early banners, it was likely handcrafted by local artisans, rather than produced under federal oversight. There's no surviving record that the Brandywine pattern was ever formally submitted to Congress, but it was used by some units, suggesting some influence. It shows up in early flag illustrations, and historians agree it was one of several layouts seriously used during the war. As the U.S. began to formalize its military and naval standards, other layouts, such as Hopkinson's staggered rows or the Circle of Stars version, gained broader institutional support. Still, the Brandywine flag stood out. It was bold, unique, and used in active service. But without political backing or widespread replication, it never became the flag of the United States. The Serapis Flag is one of the strangest early American flags, and for a brief moment, it forced the U.S. to improvise its identity on the world stage. In 1779, American naval commander John Paul Jones captured the British ship MS Serapis during the Battle of Flamborough Head. His own ship, the Bon Homme Richard, had taken heavy damage, likely including damage to its flag. When Jones took control of the Serapis, he didn't have a standard U.S. flag to raise, so his crew improvised. They hoisted a makeshift banner, 13 red, white, and blue stripes, with the canton of 13 stars in a 3-2-3-2-3 pattern. Some descriptions say the stripes were out of order or unusually colored. What's clear is that the flag wasn't a match for any official U.S. design. But it didn't matter. The Serapis docked in a Dutch port shortly after the battle. Dutch authorities accepted the flag as representative of the United States, effectively granting it diplomatic recognition. This made the Serapis flag one of the first American flags acknowledged by a foreign power. But despite its practical success, it was never formalized. Congress never adopted it, and once the war ended, it disappeared from military use. But it had served its purpose: signal U.S. sovereignty in the middle of a crisis. By the 1780s, the war was winding down, but the flag still wasn't locked in. That's where the Trumbull Flag enters the picture. It wasn't a military standard or an official proposal, but it had influence in a different way. It shaped how America saw their revolution. The flag gets its name from artist John Trumbull, who painted a series of iconic Revolutionary War scenes, including the signing of the Declaration of Independence and key battlefield moments. In several of his paintings, the American flag is shown with 13 stars in a loose rectangular grid, often 4-5-4 or 3-2-3-2-3, alongside with 13 red and white stripes. The arrangement isn't consistent across the paintings, but the general style, stars in rows rather than a circle, had real staying power. These paintings were widely distributed, especially in the early 19th century, and played a major role in how the American Revolution was remembered. They gave a visual form to the country's founding, and the flag Trumbull painted became, in effect, an unofficial template. The Trumbull flag was never submitted to Congress. It was never flown by a formal regiment and never had a legal status, but its presence in public art gave it a long afterlife. For many Americans, it felt like the real flag of the Revolution, which gave it influence even if it wasn't official. This next flag stands out, not because it failed to make it, but because it did, then got replaced. The 15-star, 15-stripe flag was officially adopted by Congress in 1795, after Vermont and Kentucky joined the Union. Unlike later versions which only added stars for new states, this flag added both stars and stripes, a move meant to reflect growth in a straightforward visual way. The flag was official and flew for 23 years, covering 2 presidencies. Most famously, it flew over Fort McHenry during the War of 1812. The 15-star, 15-stripe flag was the exact version that Francis Scott Key saw that fateful morning and inspired him to write the Star-Spangled Banner. That exact flag, measuring roughly 30 by 42 feet, still survives and is preserved in the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. But as the country continued expanding, so did the design problem. With each new state, the layout became harder to balance. By the time Indiana and Mississippi were on deck, Congress had a decision to make. Rather than continue cramming in more and more stripes, lawmakers passed the Flag Act of 1818. It fixed the number of stripes at 13, honoring the original colonies, and allowed only stars to increase with statehood. With the stripe issue solved, Congress faced another problem with the flag's design, this time with the stars, and not everybody agreed on how they should look. Congress never codified the exact star arrangement in the 1818 Flag Act. They mandated the number of stars, one for each state, but left the layout up to the flag makers. One idea that gained real traction, especially among naval officers and ceremonial designers, was the Great Star Flag. Instead of arranging stars in rows or a circle, this design grouped them into a single large 5-pointed star, made up of smaller individual stars. The goal was to symbolize unity, many states forming one nation. Visually, it was striking. From a distance, you'd see one bold star. Up close, you'd notice the detail. The Great Star wasn't chosen as the official format, but it was heavily used, especially by the Navy. Variations of it appeared on ship flags and in parade banners, and even in political iconography. For a time, it was seen as a legitimate alternative. Prominent versions of the flag were made with 20, 24, and even 26 stars, matching the state count as it grew. That gave the Great Star room to exist, unofficially, for decades. Eventually, practicality won out. The design was difficult to scale cleanly as more states joined. By the mid-19th century, staggered rows had become the dominant standard, and the Great Star faded from use. But for a while, it was a real contender. This version of the American flag, best known for the large white 76 in its blue canton, first appeared publicly around 1826 during the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. It featured 13 stars and 13 stripes, which was typical for Revolutionary-era banners. But the stars were arranged in a unique sad-face formation, and the stripes started and ended with white rather than red, a small but unusual variation. For years it was widely believed that this flag had flown during the 1777 Battle of Bennington, a key Patriot victory. Some even claimed it had been carried by militia under General John Stark. But historians now agree it was likely created decades later, probably for the semi-centennial celebrations. Even so, the Bennington flag became a patriotic icon. It was used in parades and official ceremonies to evoke revolutionary spirit. Some early 20th century publications even listed it as a candidate or variant for the national flag. Not because it had been seriously considered by Congress, but because of how deeply it resonated with the public's connection to the founding story. It was never officially proposed as a replacement, but for a time it was embraced as an unofficial heir to the founding era, a design that felt historic even if it wasn't. Like many of the other flags we've talked about, the 39-star flag was never officially recognized, but it was mass-produced anyway. In the late 1880s, the U.S. was preparing to admit new states. The flag had already been amended numerous times over the past 30 years as new states joined the Union. Each time a state signed on, a star was added, sometimes one at a time, sometimes up to 5. Like in 1818, when Tennessee, Ohio, Louisiana, Indiana, and Mississippi became part of the United States. In 1889, flag makers, anticipating another official update, began manufacturing flags with 39 stars. It had been 38, under the assumption that only one new state, likely Dakota Territory, would be added next. They were sold commercially and flown in public spaces and even government buildings. But you know what happens when you assume. In a rapid sequence of statehood announcements in 1889, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Washington were all admitted within weeks of each other, bringing the total state count to 42. The 39-star flag was immediately outdated before it could ever become official. What makes this case unique is how close it came to being adopted through public momentum. These flags were real, printed in bulk, and used across the country. They reflected the widespread expectation that the flag's design was about to change, just not by that much. No legislation was ever passed for the 39-star configuration. When the next official flag was adopted in 1890, it jumped straight to 43 stars. Idaho hopped in too. The 39-star flag is a rare example of preemptive patriotism that didn't quite match federal timing. When Alaska and Hawaii were on the verge of statehood in the late 1950s, the U.S. government knew it needed a new flag, and fast. Rather than create it themselves behind closed doors, President Eisenhower opened the process to the public. What followed was an unprecedented design wave. Over 1,500 flag submissions from citizens across the country flooded in. Teachers, veterans, students, and amateur designers sent in carefully arranged star patterns, all built to fit 50 stars. Some followed familiar logic, rows, grids, or staggered lines. Others went bold, circular constellations, spirals, diamonds, or even floral formations. Several reached the final round of internal government review. One of the most widely discussed layouts involved circular or concentric star patterns. These grouped the 50 stars in rings, emphasizing equality and unity. Visually, they echoed earlier patriotic iconography, but as promising as they looked on paper, they were difficult to scale, and the shapes could become visually distorted from a distance or when flying. Another contender was the Great Flower pattern, a starburst arrangement where the stars formed the petals of a large central shape. It was symbolic, dramatic, and tied loosely to the old Great Star concept from 1818. Despite its elegance, the design was complex to reproduce and lacked the clean visibility that military and government applications require. One particularly notable layout was the wagon wheel, which placed all 50 stars in a tight circular band resembling a wheel or seal. The design struck a balance between structure and symbolism, with the wheel evoking westward expansion and movement. It was memorable and visually distinct, but again, concerns about clarity and scaling held it back. Another type, the cross or cluster layout, placed stars in cruciform or centralized arrangements. These aimed to invoke national focus or spiritual grounding, but concerns of over-implied religious symbolism and visual imbalance limited their viability. Ultimately, the winning layout came from Robert G. Heft, a 17-year-old student from Ohio. His simple 5x10 staggered grid was clean, balanced, and scalable, and it became the version we still use today. Robert G. Heft wasn't done after his 50-star flag won. At just 17 years old, he'd already outdesigned over 1,000 competitors, and he knew the U.S. might not stop at 50 states. So he kept going, anticipating the admission of a 51st state. Whether it would be Puerto Rico, Washington, D.C., or somewhere else, Heft created an updated version. It featured a 6x9 staggered grid plus 1 star, maintaining a clean symmetry of his earlier layout. The extra star was added in a way that kept the pattern balanced, avoiding clutter or obvious improvisation. Unlike his original submission, the 51-star flag wasn't part of a national contest, but Heft mailed it to the White House and the Department of Defense anyway, and they archived it, quietly. No ceremony or announcement, but it's there. Over the years, the design has appeared in statehood rallies, speculative media, and even manufactured flags sold online. While Congress has never approved it, it's unofficially recognized as the fallback design, the one waiting in the wings if and when a 51st star becomes necessary. It's not quite rejected, but it's never been used. For now, it's just a flag on standby. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you learned something. It's interesting to see and imagine these different designs serving as the US flag. Which do you think is the most out there, the most wild, or inappropriate? And which do you like the best? Do you think any of these would make good replacements for the US flag? Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. And if you liked the video, please give us a like. And there should be another video on your screen right now about flags that you might also enjoy, so check it out. Thanks again. See you next time.